This webinar is part of the webinar series of Mastering SQL Server Migrations. This is the second part of the webinar, and this time we talk about business impact review and politics. Last time we had the big picture, what we discussed, and there was quite much things to cover. This time maybe not that much, but even more important topic. And so let me introduce the panelists next. So the panelists are, okay, of course, the agenda. So about 40 minutes of discussion and then Q&A summary. And then you are going to have a poll that is not a compulsory one, but if you want to answer, please feel free. So first of the panelists is Matt Gordon. Hello, hello. So my voice is still there? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Matt is Microsoft Data Platform MVP and developer / DBA, and is working as a director of DB management at Rev.io in Kentucky, located in Kentucky, USA, and worked with SQL Server since 2000, and also leader of the Lexington, Kentucky PAS local group, frequent domestic and international community speaker, and also IDERA ACE alumnus and 2020 friend of Red Game. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
And next is Rob Sewell. Hello, Rob.
Hi.
So Rob is a Microsoft Cloud and Data Center MVP, founder / developer / DBA of Sewell's Consulting, and located in United Kingdom. And also he's a PAS DevOps virtual chapter officer and frequent domestic and international community speaker as well. So welcome.
Thank you.
And then Gianluca Sartori. Hello, Gianluca.
Hello.
So Gianluca is also SQL Server MVP, founder / developer / DBA, located in Italy, SQLconsulting.it, and worked since SQL Server version 7, and also frequent domestic and international community speaker. So welcome.
Thank you.
So my name is Jani Savolainen, and I'm founder and CDO of SQL Governor and DB Pro Services, and located in Helsinki, Finland. And I'm pretty much like a jack of all trades, king of none. So I do all the stuff around SQL Server, from development to optimization to data science stuff and capacity planning and this kind of stuff. And also, of course, write the software. So that's what I do. And I have 20+ years experience on SQL Server technology, and I'm also chairman of PAS Finland chapter. Okay, then to the agenda. So this was the big picture, as everybody who attended last time remember. So it's about the migration process, and today we are going to discuss about the business impact review. That is the first thing that it's needed to be tackled typically on capacity planning and migration cases. So this is the whole big picture of the whole process. So we went through last time these individual points here, like selecting migration tools, technical planning meetings, capacity planning, detailed specification, migration implementation, so forth. So we are not going to go through any of those except the business impact review, and that we are going to go through in more thorough manner. And these are the main topics that we are going to cover today. So first of all, we are going to have a discussion about business scheduled processes, then about high availability and disaster recovery, talks about operations, training, external dependencies, refactoring, security, and then risk analysis. And of course, how politics is involved on the whole process as well. So first of all, let's discuss business scheduled processes. And Matt, if you would please start.
Yeah, so this seems obvious, right? It's, there are certain things you have to do at the end of a week, a month, a quarter, a year, whatever, and you wouldn't want any migration work to impact those. That said, I've been a part of a couple projects recently where, the firm was large, so the person or the group kind of sponsoring the project and sponsoring me executing it was not aware of all the different kind of internal, like certain teams had end of quarter, end of month things. That's very important that everybody is aware of those, because when you're putting together, whether you're an external consultant and you're putting together a statement of work or something like that, or whether you're internal and you're just trying to build a schedule and a plan and all those sorts of things, you have to be aware of all of this. And if you don't, you can kind of move forward with the schedule as you think it is, but you need to talk to every team and every group involved and say, here's how I think this is going to work based on what I know. What scheduled processes, events, whatever, do you have that will impact what I think? And there's nothing technical, nothing fancy here. You just have to talk to people and make sure that everything that they normally do is incorporated into your plan and that you're not affecting it in a way that you don't expect to.
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Rob, Gianluca, anything to add?
So, so Matt, what about? Let's get straight into it. We're talking at business level here. We're not talking technical. So, what about when uber important person in finance says, "No, Matt, you can't do that. You can't do it in that time zone. We absolutely not for that quarter, that half of a year. Absolutely, we're definitely not making any changes."
Well, that does get straight into the political angle of it. It depends how uber important that person is and who you're working with. So it may be that that's something that you have to honor, and they're right that on that time zone, on that date and time, you cannot migrate the thing that you want to, and you'll need to adjust your plan. However, in my experience, certainly there are people that throw weight around as part of these things that they don't have. And that's where, and I'm sure we'll go back to this several times during this hour, that's where you have to understand who you're working with, and not only the official organizational structure, but the organizational structure that gets things done. And it could be that, yes, that uber important person says that you can't do this, but they're wrong. And actually the person that is sponsoring your project, or that is kind of actually in charge of the unit that uber important person thinks they are, and on paper they are, they can actually say, well, listen, I can get a change request through, I can sign it, and you can go ahead and carry out your plan. There's no 100% perfect answer there. And you should try to honor what everybody says, but I've been a part of projects, you probably have too, where there are certain people in at least a written position of authority that will do everything they can to throw every obstacle in your way, even if it's not a legitimate thing.
So I think it also has to do with making very clear what's the importance of the project, and also involving the right people into it, and making sure that everyone is on board before you even start thinking of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's very good point. Like having the clear understanding on the project stakeholders and keep a certain pace in having, for example, like steering meetings if needed. So that would be on agenda of steering meeting then, if somebody raises that up and says that this is very important and it kind of endangers the whole project. So yeah, That's important.
I think it's easier as a external person sometimes to be able to tap into the person that wants that change to move forward and enable that sort of negotiation, because it is a negotiation, and it might be that, you know, head of group one is actually they're the ones that are budgeting for the cost of the next 4 years, and they want to move to the cloud before they get to, you know, have to start to pay some more money, and that's what their budget request is. And so you might need to just sort of point out to the person that's trying to stop it that, hey, you know, perhaps you need to go and talk to the person that's supplying you, and let's work this forward. But it's generally, I would say, easier with either an exceptional project manager, somebody who really understands what's going on, and a program manager as well that really sees what's happening in the next year for the business, and also being that external person, you know, being not involved in all of the politics that's going forward. I think that's something that'll help.
Yeah, and it's also good to know the motivation behind the project to start with, because like you said, a lot of times it might be, hey, if we don't get this finished in 3 months, we have to write a check to Microsoft or a reseller or something for a lot of money, and we're willing to kind of crack a couple heads to get that done because a few upset people is preferred to a 7-digit licensing bill. So yeah, going in and not just kind of blindly executing like, well, we have to get it done by then and I don't know why. You should always know why, because you're going to need that.
But
Yeah,
equally,
exactly.
if your business solely relies on the 3 months over, you know, Black Friday and Christmas and New Year's, then you need to listen to those people, because, you know, they're the ones that bring the money.
Yeah, you really have to take a holistic view of all of it. You can't just charge forward, because like you said, the licensing might be very important, but if you're supposed to do something over the busiest 3 months of the year, then that should be rethought as well.
All right, so good discussion here about the business schedule processes. Let's then take the high availability and disaster recovery. So Rob, if you would please introduce this part of the process.
So I think to start off with, we're technical folk. So when we talk about high availability and disaster recovery, we're thinking about ways that we can make sure that our data is secure and is available under all circumstances and can recover from X numbers of disasters depending on the costs. But at this point in time, we're not looking at the technical part of this. We're looking at the role that the business sees. How important is this data? So how much uptime and downtime is allowed? Also, do we have our SLAs in place? How many times have the 4 of us probably gone into organizations and said, what's the SLA for this system? And just got blank faces back, like, well, I don't know. Well, how available do you need it? Always. Okay. So are you going to pay 8 figures every day for that? Well, no. Well, okay, so let's have a discussion. And this is the point at the time within this migration project where you need to gather that information and make sure you understand it, because it's going to define the technical decisions that you make as you move forward, not just for what you're actually going to do, but when you're going to do it. You know, we in that state where we've got a business that relies on Black Friday, well, they might throughout the year only be able to accept a 30-minute outage to their main sales system. So that's something that you need to know right now here at this business impact review stage, not 3 months down the line when you're thinking about how you're going to implement it, because then you're going to have to start to make challenges. And also we're looking here not just about the availability of the data, but the compatibility with existing systems. It's no good moving your systems, your data into the cloud and migrating it if your applications that run your business can't connect to Azure SQL database, for example.
Yeah, good points. Matt, Gianluca, anything to add here?
I would only say that it was more appropriate to say Cyber Monday rather than Black Friday.
Other than that, everything Rob said was right.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that because we had a bit, how would I say, clumsy start from my behalf because of the problems with audio. Let's take the next topic that is also super important. That is operations. And why don't you, Rob, continue from this as well?
So operations is really important, and again, at this point of view, we're not really talking properly about technical implementation. We're talking about the effect on the business. You want to be able to understand what your processes are and how they're going to affect what happens next. If you're an organization that's moving into the cloud, what you might find is that there are new processes for cloud approval, making sure that we define our things so that they are safe and secure for being in the cloud, because there's a lot of there was a lot of FUD about what data is available in the cloud, and businesses have created a lot of process around that. And if it's going to take you 4 months to get approval from your organization to put your data in the cloud, then you need to know about that straight up front and start creating those documents and having those meetings to get that thing in place. You also want to talk about how you're going to support this new data or this new system that you've migrated to the cloud. We're always talking about migrating to the cloud, because you might have some training requirements. You might have to inform your service desk. Your service desk might live in another continent. We might need to sort about access to Azure resources and how all these things are put into place. How is your new system going to interact with that process for your operation, so that when something goes wrong, it's filtered down through the right funnels and doesn't get lost in some black hole with somebody going, oh, I don't know what to do with this. Where does this go? It's a huge piece. We've got to look at how we are monitoring this system. We probably have good understanding of how we plug our existing environments into any number of third-party SQL monitoring solutions, or things like Splunk or SCOM, which are big estate monitoring solutions. Are those going to work in Azure, as taking a cloud as an example? Or are we going to have to now start looking at, well, now we need to do log analytics. We need to push our data into there, but that doesn't give us the same sort of information in the same way, and we can't set our alerts off it, and maybe it doesn't automatically generate alerts into our incident management system, and all of this needs to be resolved. There's a whole bundle of consideration that you need to think about there. And again, at this point of view, we're not talking about technically doing that. We're talking about having a conversation with the right people to understand holistically what's going to happen for our migration, and making sure that as we move down the journey and we focus on our technical part of moving our databases from on-prem into the cloud, that all of this other stuff that comes around it is going to make sure that the project is a success and isn't going to be the things that are falling down.
Yeah, very good. So Matt, Gianluca, any comments on this?
Well, I can only say well said about training, which also is an opportunity to move to the next topic, because I would say that it's not only about training for what is next, so the next platform you are migrating to, This has a lot to do with operations, but also you need to prepare, you need to train for the migration itself. If you have some skills that you are missing to implement the migration itself, you need to fill the gap. And also, this involves a lot of people. This involves the sysadmins, involves the DBAs, involves all the people that will have to implement the migration and maintain it over time. And this has to be planned very thoroughly, because in my experience, this is something that always gets overlooked. And when the migration is nearing, somebody suddenly realizes that they don't have the skills and they need to plan for training. And it's not something that happens quickly. You need to plan for that. You need to find the resources. You need to plan for people being away for training. You need to plan for the training itself. So you need to find the people who will deliver the training. They need to be a good resource for delivering the training. And so there's a long process that has to be set up initially to let this run smoothly.
Yeah, and I think you have to clearly detail, which groups own what, because I've been a part of a couple projects where you've got a DBA team, you have, let's say, an operations team, and there's like a cloud architect that's part of that. Well, right now on-prem, the DBA team owns all their hardware, all that stuff. But if they're, maybe not wanting to take ownership of that next step, then you get into this very awkward thing where, let's say you have to set up a logical server for an Azure SQL database or something like that. They're like, oh, we don't do that. That's the cloud person, or that's the operations team. The DBA team no longer owns any of this because it's in the magical cloud and we have nothing to do with that except putting data on it. That's not the time you want to be having a discussion like that. When it comes time to execute things, migrate things, and keep those things running, you want to have had all those conversations way before then. And it can be tricky, and that's going back to kind of the politics theme of it. That's where you need to understand the different team leads, who they report to, and kind of all the relationships there, and try to get people positioned the way that you think, or at least talk them into thinking your idea is the best one, because you do get into these awkward handoffs where there are a lot of database servers running in the cloud somewhere, and the DBA team is completely hands off to them because they're not a cloud operations team. So yeah, knowing all that up front, writing it down, as much as documentation is not fun, is very helpful.
Yeah.
Do your network team know how to set up network intent policies and route tables to enable a managed instance to work with that network infrastructure? Probably not. And equally, your database team probably doesn't either. So it's all of these sort of things which need to be thought about, like Matt said.
Well, right, and yeah, you get into that thing where, oh, it's their SQL in the name. The database people take care of that, and you're exactly right. The networking element of moving to Azure or any cloud, probably it's not your DBA team that's taking care of all that. But yeah, just walking, having somebody with that experience and kind of virtually walking through it, saying at this stage who takes care of what, and who owns it afterwards, and then writing that down so everybody knows. Pretty important.
Yeah, in my experience, what I've seen is migrating to the cloud for DBAs. So my experience is from the DBA side, of course. But I have witnessed many cases wherein the sysadmin teams took over the DBA stuff, which was on-prem when it was migrated to the cloud, because they took care of all the other things that migrated to the cloud previously. So they're also going to take care of that. And yeah, there are risks associated to that. And what you are usually free to work on-prem is sometimes not the same of what you have in the cloud. You have less, maybe less responsibilities, but also less ability to execute what's your daily job on that.
Yeah, very, very good points. Basically, then I think it's good to move to next topic here, and that would be the external dependencies. So how all the, for example, if how all the software and applications are bound to servers, how the servers discuss with each other, and if they are virtualized, is there any boundaries in between the hosts and VMs and this kind of stuff. So Gianluca, you started so well, so why don't you continue here?
Yeah, so, well, in this case, we're talking about the business aspect of this. And so the focus is obviously to implement at some point the technical part of the migration. And in order to do this, we need to be aware of what we are migrating and what are the relationships and the dependencies with the other parts of the infrastructure that we are planning to move. And if the cloud is the target, we need to make sure that also the dependencies are compatible with the target environment we are moving to. And if you imagine moving a database server to Azure SQL database or Azure SQL managed instance, there are some things that are compatible with that, some others that are not. And we need to have a complete description and a complete map of what are the dependencies. And this has to be designed and written down with the business people, not only with the technical people. And sometimes some of these dependencies are not obvious, and some others are more obvious, like jobs and integration services or linked servers. And we need to plan for taking enough time to track down all the connections and all the business dependencies between the servers we want to migrate and the services that will not be migrated. And this requires time, and it's not something that you do overnight. So again, it's about planning all the documentation and the time to write it down.
Yeah, so Matt, Rob, do you have anything to add on this?
I think also you got to, it's not just the things for your organization. You know, you will undoubtedly in these days be pulling information from other sources, whether that's, you know, open data or whether that's data from, you know, third parties that you deal with, and you'll probably be pushing data to third parties as well. You got to think about those, and who needs access. I mean, security is something we'll talk about later on, but understanding who needs access to what is something that you need to. It's an external dependency. If your third party's FTP site needs to be able to pick data up from a share, you know, then you need to make sure that is configured, and maybe you need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, you know, this is going to change.
Yeah, exactly. It's also knowing the role that the software you're moving or data you're moving plays, because you may be working with a team that doesn't even know all the dependencies that exist. They just take care of product X. and understanding its role in the org, you need to be able to ask the right questions to kind of smoke out those dependencies that they don't know about. Because what can happen is if you don't, then you get everything moved, and everything you know about was great, but you've broken something very important because nobody asked the question of, well, what does this do? And that's not a conversation that's fun to be on the end of. Speaking from experience as an external person who, we didn't know. And so that's a good lesson to learn that I would like to pass along is, don't be afraid to be a little annoying and be like, no, what does this do? What role does it play in your processes, business, whatever? And who else maybe do we need to talk to? And just kind of walk through everything it does, because they may say, well, and then a finance person comes in and does this. Well, have we talked to them? Well, no, but we don't know what they do with it. Okay, this is a good time to find out what they do with it and see if we've impacted them. Because, you don't want to find out after the fact.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you stop scope creep?
Well, so that's a great point, because sometimes what happens is, oh, you're moving that. Well, we have these 4 things that talk to it, and they need to go to Azure, Amazon, or whatever too, because you're moving the thing that they talk to. The way you stop scope creep is by being really stubborn. And going back to your point, if this is a project of some size, a really dynamic project manager is going to make everybody happier, because you want the tech people to stay focused on tech and operations stuff, and you want a PM that has that broader scope and kind of understanding of all the players involved. It's not, depending on the size, maybe that's not a critical need, but I can think back to many projects that I've been a part of where you come in as a consultant, and consulting firms are usually pretty lean, and you don't get that role plugged in, and then you get several weeks in, you're like, wow, it'd be really great if we had a really strong PM to kind of steer this ship for us.
Yeah,
that's absolutely crucial. When the company is very big and there are many layers of software that they had to go through throughout the years, and sometimes people don't even remember what was the thing that was set up 10 years ago to do exactly that, and there's a DLL that does this and that and writes a file, and nobody remembers that. And having a PM that knows all the connections is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, exactly. And what I have learned is like if there is like tens or hundreds servers or even more, especially in the environments where there is thousands or tens of thousands of databases, it's super important to be able to prioritize things. So also prioritize the external dependencies, which are the most critical applications, which are the most critical servers, instances, maybe even databases, and then start tracking them. Because many times when you do the 20% of the job, it's like done 80% if you do the right things, right 20%. So that's also very important to kind of start the bigger migration projects, because you just maybe quite often it's even impossible to get into a level of close to 100% of these dependencies. It's rarely documented, on my opinion, what I have seen, all the dependencies and linkage to from the servers to applications and so forth.
It's because it's really hard to keep up. Those documentation, somebody will start it with good heart, and then it will get stopped, and then somebody else will do some more work, and that'll be placed somewhere else. It's really hard to keep up, and perhaps that's something that you want to think about when you're at this point in your migration, is how are we going to make sure we know what that's going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, time flies, so we need to go to our next topic. So that would be the refactoring. And Matt, if you please tell something about that.
Yeah, so this is easy to overlook. It's no fun to talk about, but a lot of times we're migrating things because they're old. And maybe the hardware they're on is no good or likely to be no good soon. Probably the software has some age to it as well. And it's important when you're, not to get technical, but when you're mapping out the destinations, it's important to understand what the limitations of those are. So, for example, let's say you have some very old code and it does cross database queries. Well, going to Azure's SQL database, just this, a single one, it's not going to easily support that at all. So, maybe you should pick a destination where code change isn't involved, or maybe Azure SQL database is the right destination for that, but then you have to talk about, well, code changes are involved here. And this gets more complicated when there are software vendors involved and things like that. Like the last large scale project like this that I worked on, we had quite a mix of things. We had some home built stuff, and for those, it was pretty straightforward. There was probably for everything I can think of, there was still a team that supported that. So you would say, well, you need to change this to that. And I'm like, okay, great. But there were a lot of third-party bits of software too. And not all those companies still existed even. So that's a different conversation. So where we started was the executive sponsor of that. It's like, all right, you take all of this and move it. And we couldn't. And it's important, like I said, to kind of understand what the limits of the desired destination are and be able to clearly spell those out and say, well, we have to make code changes for this to work. And for software that you own and write, that's one thing. For software that you bought, that's a separate thing. And you have to go through that up front. I can think of coming in as a consultant behind some projects that failed. And one of the chief obstacles was exactly this, is that they had somebody, working on it that didn't know that. So they're like, all right, we're moving everything to Azure SQL, and up it went, and that went fine, and then the software wouldn't work. And a very easy thing to overlook with that is the differences in authentication as well. And that goes back to, that may be outside of the DBA team. Maybe that's networking, operations, cloud architecture, whatever they call it, but there are authentication differences that may require refactoring, even if you run the tools against it and it says Azure SQL will run all of this. It very well might, but you might not be able to log into it the way the app wants to. So that's, getting a good team in place and getting a good team across the different disciplines you're going to need is very important for something like this, because it's really embarrassing to get something moved and find out it doesn't work because you overlooked a bit like this.
Yeah, Gianluca, Rob, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I want to say that especially the legacy code is the one that gets hairy when you have to move it around. And sometimes, as Matt said, the software vendor doesn't exist anymore. And what do you do in those cases? You have to take over the software and make it your own. And that's really complicated. So if you have legacy software, you cannot simply pretend it doesn't exist. That's something you need to do about it. And sometimes you cannot even buy something newer, replace it with something newer, because it is tied to a physical machine that comes with specifically that software, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Very good point. I remember once, maybe like 15 years ago, there was a customer who was having migration, and they had a super big DTS, if everybody remembers the data transformation services. So I remember in late 90s when I look at it at first, or 2000, I think it's DTS was 2000. Yeah. So they needed to upgrade their environment, and there was this problem that they thought that they need to implement all the DTS packages against SSIS. And then all of a sudden I found out that they actually have a few more extra years here for the DTS packages, because it's runnable inside the SQL. So they were quite happy, because they were already budgeting the project of hundreds of thousands to just implement on SSIS So this kind of stuff with legacy code is super important, and there the knowledge is definitely power.
But also, don't forget, this is where we're talking with the business, and sometimes having these conversations makes it more obvious to the business that, hey, what we're not doing is saying to tech people, pick that stuff up and put it in the cloud because it will be cheaper. That actually there's a whole lot more involved here. And also, sometimes when you have these conversations with third parties, you'll end up with responses which are, does your software run in the cloud? Answer, yes. Okay, can you tell me how to do this? Put it in a virtual machine and then it'll be fine. And if your migration project is get rid of virtual machines, now you've suddenly got a clash. The other part is the bit we keep going back to. It's the politics and it's the money. So you'll go to a third party and you'll say, will this run in the cloud? And they'll say, yes, absolutely. Oh, you're going to be running in the cloud. That means you're going to be able to take advantage of our new cloud licensing model. Let's have a discussion about that. And we'll need a new cloud offering maintenance solution to sell you. And suddenly all of these things will come out of the wire. And like Gianluca says, sometimes the legacy code is not replaceable. But equally, sometimes these third-party solutions are replaceable. And this is the point of time in this meeting when you have a conversation with the business people and say, right, we could pick this up and you can pay that money. Or maybe we can pick this up and you can also change that from using this third party's contract to this managed service that Azure provide, AWS provide, that third party solution provides that's better than this one.
Okay, so, very good. So, yeah. Okay, so we're a bit not much, but still have some time here. So let's go to the second last topic, so the security. And if Rob, you would like to continue from this.
Seriously, this could be an entire session all by its own for the technical implementation of this security. But if we try and concentrate just on looking at this business impact decision, we're going to take into account a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about. So all of the processes, the approval gates, your high availability discussions, how you're going to deal with operations, what training you require, what your external dependencies are. These are all going to feed back into this security point of view. And I think the most important thing to remember is that the security knowledge that we have from doing things on-prem for 30 years does not necessarily relate straight into the cloud. Of course, role-based access, using Active Directory authentication, those things are all the things that you want to be doing. But there's a whole load of more that you want to be taking into account for. The governance of the cloud and how that is achieved when you start with this migration project and you're at the beginning depends solely on how the organization you're working with, how advanced they are. It might be that you'll just plug straight in and they've got a load of Azure templates that they throw over the top of anything you create, and you're covered. As long as you've got those, you've got cloud governance, you've got approvals, everything will work, it'll be great. What you might find is that they're in the process of that journey as well. And they might go, great, you guys look like you know what you're doing. You can join with us. And now we're going to do this journey together. And it's at this point of this process, at this meetings, it's not just one meeting, this is a bunch of meetings with a bunch of different people, that you're going to find out how that's going to work. And like I said, it's about managing expectations, because you can really give your business people the understanding that, hey, what we've got here is a whole bundle of stuff that we need to untangle. And what we want to end up with is a nice system that's all neatly cabled and everything's beautiful. And what we've got right now is a mess where somebody's just kept plugging stuff in for the last 20 years. And now we've got to bring it through, and that's going to take time. And the important thing is to keep looking forward to the benefit that we're going to get is we're going to be able to deploy our code better. We're going to have more testing available. We're going to have more manageable costs. You're going to be able to reduce and increase your resources without a lot of effort. Getting that through, all of that needs to cope with security, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in charge of the project that migrates everything into AWS and you're on the front page of the register because it's unauthenticated S3 bucket and all the data's there.
Yeah, so thank you, Rob. Do you have anything to add here, Matt, Gianluca?
Not really.
Okay.
No,
There must be something.
That was thorough. That was thorough then. Okay, so let's get to a last topic here, and we are on a schedule here, better than last time. Woohoo! So let's have a few words about the risk analysis, and I've seen that very useful in every migration project. I've involved on my career in few tens of migration projects, and of course my specialty is the capacity planning part of it. So as I said, jack of all trades, king of none. So the migration process thoroughly from the very beginning to the end, it may last in a bigger companies many years, many times, and risk analysis is very good to implement in the very beginning, because it answers the questions like which are the risks of the project, and then on the other hand, what are the business impacts if it's going to happen, and then how to mitigate those risks. And you can also put different criticality levels on these risks, like which would endanger the whole project and what would be the effects on the financial side. And for example, if it affects the schedule of the project, if it affects the outcome of the project, so forth. So different view angles for the risk analysis, and that's something that actually, as well as security, it kind of intersects each of these topics that we covered today. Do you have Rob, Gianluca, Matt, anything to add on this topic?
This is not a thing that's a lot of fun to do, but like you said, it's really, really important. And none of us love to talk licensing, but that's a really critical part of this, because again,
Yes.
going back to what's your motivation for the migration to start with? If it's cost savings, there's certain things you're going to do moving to the cloud that if the motivation is something else, performance or whatever, you might not do. So yeah, knowing all the things at play is really important to do up front. And that, you can do this without a project manager, but somebody with that set of skills is certainly helpful at this stage, because the technical people, we may not always be the best at taking that kind of holistic view of this, and what are all the problems we might cause and what are all the teams involved and all that. We tend to get pretty laser focused on executing the thing. So having somebody, technical or not, kind of shepherding this part through is very useful.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very good point. All right, so I think it's time to go for the next step, which is a questions part. So now if you have any questions, so please feel free to ask us, and we try to answer as well as we can. So you can write them in the chat there. Okay, now it starts to come some questions here. So You can write those questions to the chat. Let's wait for a couple of minutes if anybody has anything to ask. So. And meanwhile, we can talk about weather. It's raining here in Finland, and it's already dark because we are in Finland. So
Here in Kentucky,
Fair
it's
enough.
actually snowing.
whoa,
Wow.
okay.
If I could show you my background, which I can't because I have a project under construction back here. So it's kind of ugly. Yeah, there's roughly 2 inches of snow out my rear window, which is
Wow.
very unfortunate in November in Kentucky. That's not what we sign up for.
No, it's sunny but cold in Italy.
Okay.
So what we've got is what we'd call pea soup, which is just you wake up in the morning and it's very foggy, and then it gets a bit lighter, and then in the evening the fog comes even thicker. So it's been like that for a couple of days now.
English
Very
weather.
English weather, yeah, damp and horrible. So I would like to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
How much time do you spend, or should you spend, with the business impact review before you can start the next stage, the more technical stages?
Yeah, that's super good question. I can pick this first. So what comes to my experience, as I said, I'm pretty much more like a specialist. So I'm in the early stages, sometimes involved, yes, and especially in the capacity planning parts of the project. So I have many times kind of reviewed in technical parts of the capacity planning again those topics, because I need to know the external dependencies, I need to know the SLAs, I need to know many inputs from this business impact review. So it's super important. At latest, you will face that thing if it's not yet done when you start the capacity planning. Of course, when it's the migration, detailed specification and implementation, then it's all needs to be very clear already in that point. So I would say that it's super important, and one would use quite a lot of resources, and it's kind of through the whole process of migration implementation. And if I would say some rough estimate, maybe even few tens of percents, like 20–30% of the whole resources would easily, and if the project is bigger, it starts to kind of be the one of the most important parts of the project, I would say so. But I don't know what you think about this, Matt, Gianluca. Do you have any different opinion on this?
Well, I think it needs to last as long as you come up with an answer for the question: should we or shouldn't we do it? And sometimes a legitimate answer is not to perform the migration because the risks or the difficulties are enough to stop the project.
Exactly. Yeah. Matt?
I think that's right, and that's something, that's almost trickier coming in as the external person, because if this part hasn't been done and you're on a statement of work to get it done and you realize that this analysis hasn't happened, it's really incumbent on you to be quite honest about where you're at. And that's a very difficult conversation to have, because you may be, if you do it right, then hopefully you're extending your time there and you're a part of that analysis portion as well. But you may be talking yourself out of some paid work, because you may say, listen, we're not positioned for success here at all. And I have to be honest about that with you. And that's no fun to say. But yeah, you should go in eyes wide open. If you're coming in externally or even internally, it's okay to sound the alarm that hasn't happened, because it needs to.
Okay, so then it's time for a brief summary. So we are actually going to have a next webinar in this series of webinars in next January, so a bit after 1 month, and it's going to be around selecting the migration tools. What different kinds of tools you are going to need on migration process, and that's quite a topic, so it's easily talkable for 1 hour. And so you can follow us on Twitter. There's our Twitter handle, so SQL at Speed, Spaghetti DBA, SQL DBA with the bird, and Cyber Sigma are our Twitter handles, and that's pretty much what we needed to cover. So thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Gianluca, and thank you, audience.
Thank you.
And
Thank
have
you.
a great
Goodbye.
day. Goodbye.